My name is Burhan Khalid. I am the Electronic Channels Development Manager at Ahl United Bank. If you don't know what that means, in short, that means that anything that has to do with a bank but doesn't have to do with the branch, it comes under our department, and we help move money around electronically. So you might assume that because I've been moving money around electronically for a long time, and I work for the oldest bank in Kuwait, which was there even before Kuwait was there, that I might have a lot of insight on Bitcoin, well, specifically cryptocurrency, which is what we're here to talk about. The fact of the matter is, if you think back to when the first commercial exchange happened, 15,000 BC, and then it happened with trading, which was simply barter. Like, I have one cow, I need one sack of rice. You agree that one cow is equal to one sack of rice, we do a barter, right? But if you think about it now, currency is a high-level abstraction of value, because it's very difficult for me to carry around 5,000 cows if I want to go buy a car, right? So they had to come up with an abstraction, and this abstraction is what we normally call currency. Now, currency is only good if it has value. Now, I'll just ask a question. Where does the value of currency come from? No.
People.
No.
Yeah. And the government sets the value.
No.
How much willing to accept?
No. It comes from trust. That's it. It has nothing to do with gold, silver, bullion, people. It has to do with trust. You trust that the United States government is going to honor the value that it states on the bill. And ironically enough, on the bill it says, "In God we trust." Okay? So the value of currency comes from trust. It has nothing to do with gold. Back when you're trying to establish a currency, you need something that people already trust in order for them to trust your currency. So when a new country comes about and they have to print new types of currency, they have to back it up with something, because honestly, I don't trust you. Right? I don't trust your currency. So originally, what was taught in economics is currency is backed by gold. Like, there's giant gold reserves, and everybody has a gold reserve equivalent to X amount, but that's not true. Currency is backed by trust. And trust is a direct byproduct of stability. If you have a stable government, you have a stable economy, your currency stays stable. And the more stable it is, the more trustworthy it is. The more other people are willing to rely on it, which is why global transactions only happen in 4 major currencies. That's it. Can you guess the 4 currencies? I already told you one, which is the US dollar. What is the other?
The Chinese yuan.
No. Chinese yuan is only tradable in China.
Japanese.
No. Man, you guys. Okay. US dollars, euro, pound. That's it.
You said 4.
I know, I lied. Off by 1 errors. So there are 3 major trading currencies. Every bank in the world, every currency system in the world works on these 3 currencies. Okay? If you want to talk to someone outside of your country. Of course, inside of your country, you can speak whatever currency you want. Like within Kuwait, it's all KD. Outside Kuwait, no one will give a crap about KD. Everyone's going to ask you, okay, either bring me dollars or euros, okay, or pounds. So when we're talking about a new form of, well, let's not call it currency because no one calls it currency. It's Bitcoin. Bitcoin is just a word. You can call it Burhan coin. It doesn't matter. In fact, there are many kinds of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is a particular type of thing. It adds value to a specific computational work that you have done. They will explain more what I mean by that. But in reality, Bitcoin is not currency. You cannot go to the bank and deposit Bitcoin. Nowhere in the world, actually. You can trade it. It's like back to the cow and the grain problem. You have X Bitcoin, someone else believes this Bitcoin is worth that much. Okay, I'm willing to give you something for it. And the whole network revolves around that. As a banker, and as there was a discussion going around here, as is normally the case, central banks are rarely black and white in what they say. They're always in the gray. So recently, a few months back actually, they sent a circular to all banks asking them to let them know if there's any company, or have you heard about this currency, Bitcoin? Are you aware of it? Are you dealing with anyone that's dealing with it? Let us know. That's what they said. Now, when the central bank says let us know, banks automatically say no. Even if they have something, they say no. Because banks are all about risk. And again, risk evaluates, it's directly related to the value of currency. The more risk, the more volatile it is. I heard discussions that it was like $50, $1,000, $2, $7, the exchange rate. This is risk. Banks are not averse to risk. What if I told you that, hey, come deposit your Bitcoin in my bank. Today it's going to be worth 5 KD for every Bitcoin. Ask me in 1 hour, it might be worth 2 KD for every Bitcoin. That's how unstable it is. However, it is something very exciting. It's a very liberating feeling when you don't have a central authority controlling what you can and cannot do. There is no KNet, there is no central bank. It's just me and you, and we agree on something and we trade. And the funny thing is, the person buying pays all the fees. The person selling doesn't do anything. So if I'm purchasing something from you for Bitcoin, unlike here, where there's a transaction fee on credit cards and I'm paying, the buyer pays everything. The other thing that is unique about the normal currency that you're used to is that there is a trust in the form of a bank. Now, the bank provides lots of types of trust. For example, it's safe. Your money is not going to be stolen. It's not going to be eaten by rats. There's encryption and everything. But another thing that the banks provide that's very critical is a ledger, a trusted ledger, which is a trusted record of transactions, so that you cannot double bill someone and someone cannot double bill you. In the cryptocurrency world, there is such a thing called a ledger. It's called a blockchain, if I'm not mistaken. And this is basically the record of transactions happening. And this thing is like, okay, if I know it, then you know it. You know it, then you know it. And it's distributed. That's why they call it the peer-to-peer currency. The integrity of this ledger is mathematically, cryptographically proven. And the other way to think about it is that it's very difficult for someone to fake the ledger. It would take an exponential amount of computing power to calculate and fake a ledger, a bit chain, blockchain, sorry, thank you very much. However, there are cases where if you lose your key, you lose all your Bitcoin. There was a case of someone who lost $7.5 million in Bitcoin because he lost the hard drive which had his private key. And without this private key, the Bitcoins are no longer validated across the net. And it's true. If you're dealing in Bitcoin, forget what everyone else tells you, make sure you secure your private key. Without the private key that you use to sign your wallet, your coins are worthless. They'll correct me if I'm saying something wrong here, I'm sure. But I don't want to take much time away from the presenters here. So I would just like to, I'll be available here if you have any questions or discussions and you want to know about why banks don't accept Bitcoin, what's the big situation about this. But in the end, it all boils down to trust. And that's basically the cornerstone of every type of commerce you get. No matter what currency you're dealing with, no matter how big or how small the amount of transaction, it all boils down to trust, right? And so the question everyone's asking is, do I trust Bitcoin with my life savings, for example? I know Lamborghini does, because Lamborghini, you can go buy a Lamborghini with Bitcoins. They were the first car company, I believe, that accepted Bitcoins. There are lots of companies that, Dell, for example, they'll accept Bitcoins. Overstock, they made a huge announcement. The CEO did a keynote at a Bitcoin conference where he announced that we're started accepting Bitcoins. So you can get real value out of it. I mean, you can exchange something that you literally sitting on a computer, let the computer run, do some computation, eventually gives you, I think, 25 or 5 or whatever it is, Bitcoins, and now you have something that you can trade. However, there's an upper limit. I think only 21 million Bitcoins will ever be generated, right? Now, I'm not an expert to tell you what that means. So that means, oh, there's no more money left? I don't know about that. But what I can tell you that with every iteration, when they distribute the work unit, the value you get from each work is going to drop. every cycle. I think the next cycle is 14 or 2040 or something. They're going to keep dropping it down until eventually all 21 million Bitcoins have been calculated version. Okay? Yes?
Forgot to mention a key thing. All currencies are inflation currencies,
Yeah.
where Bitcoin is a deflation currency.
It doesn't matter if it's inflation or deflation, because if it's not,
That's why there's a fixed number of Bitcoins, the 21
if it's not legal tender, it doesn't make a difference. You know what legal tender means? Okay, legal tender, it's a legal term, okay? What it means is that this piece of whatever, paper, it's authorized for you to do trade in, okay? On every currency note, it says somewhere or the other, this is legal tender, which means that this is a valid piece of alternative to actually bringing sacks of gold or sacks of silver or grains or whatever it is. Bitcoin is not legal tender anywhere in the world, as far as I'm aware. You can go and find Bitcoin ATMs. You can go find a suitcase which will print you the Bitcoin. That's fine then. You're free to speculate in it, is what I'm saying. And it's an exciting field. And I'm also personally looking into it. But as far as Burhan the banker is concerned, Bitcoin might as well not exist. Okay. Thank you very much, and I'm off to the gentleman from Bitfills. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Abdullah Almezairee. I'm one of the 3 co-founders of Bitfills. My 2 other co-founders are sitting there, Saad Al-Abeid and Saad Al-Khlaifi. Now, ironically, I'm speaking up here, but it was Saad Al-Abeid who introduced me to Bitcoin and our co-founder. He came to us, he said, listen to this podcast. It was a few years ago. This is really interesting stuff, technically. Economically, we were not interested from it. We're 3 engineers. I did not expect 4 years ago that I would be standing here talking about a financial instrument, okay, or the intersection between finance and technology. But the gravitational pull was that strong. So that's how we got introduced to Bitcoin. Now, before we go any further, we have a demo set up towards the end. There's some preparation for the demo to work. So what I need from you guys, if you want to participate, and I encourage you to, because you'll get free Bitcoins. Just download the wallet, the application depending on your phone. So on the iPhone, it's called the Hive Wallet. On Android, it's called Hive, Bitcoin, and Litecoin Wallet. There are similar names, so make sure you get the proper one. The steps are easy. Some of them take 20 to 30 seconds, but basically create a new wallet, select that, select create passphrase, then just go past whatever it instructs you to do. Check the box, click set your PIN, and then click receive. You'll see an address. Now it's a string of alphanumeric numbers. It looks like garbage, right? But it means something. Copy it, go to that URL, you'll see a form, paste that address in that form. I know this sounds complicated. I promise by the end, it will make sense. Okay, so who's gonna participate? Okay. Can I see a show of hands? Who's gonna participate? Good. We need at least 10 to make this work. I'll just give you a couple of minutes to go through the steps. صوت تمام? Is everybody connected on Wi-Fi or 3G or 4G or? Nobody's connected on Wi-Fi, huh? Good.
Can you guys connect to Sardab Lab's Wi-Fi? The password is we love Sardab.
Who's already set their PIN? Inshallah. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna move on. If there's any issue, just put your hand up and look at one of my two colleagues. They'll come over and finish setting up your wallet for you. Okay, so what this session is not, I'll start with the disclaimer. This is not, as we were talking earlier with, where are you? Yeah, with the gentleman over there. This is not an effort to convince you to buy Bitcoins. I'll be clear, I'm not even like winking at you to buy Bitcoins, okay? So this is it's very volatile, it's very high risk, okay? I do not recommend that my relatives invest in Bitcoin. I recommend you play with it with small amounts, yes, but not any amounts you're not willing to lose. Another thing that contrasts beautifully what Burhan said earlier, he talked a little bit about the economics. So he did a very good introduction there. So I'll finish that off by saying this is not a lesson in economics. Now, you'll see as I move forward, I'll try to sidestep the law, I'll try to sidestep politics, I'll try to sidestep economics, but that's very hard to do with Bitcoin because Bitcoin is not just a technology. Without the economic incentive and the legal environment we live in, Bitcoin would not hold together. So that will be clearer as we move along. So what is Bitcoin? That's not an easy question to answer. This was an answer that a developer, so this guy is very tech savvy. He was talking to a reporter, so he said, the first 6 times you think you understand Bitcoin, you don't. It's very counterintuitive to begin with. In fact, we were talking to a high official at the Central Bank of Kuwait. We were in a discussion with him, and maybe 30 minutes into the discussion, he was very defensive. 30 minutes in, we told him, no, the transactions are public. You can see what everybody's doing. So then he stepped back and then he adapted his questions. He was generally curious, but that's why it's hard to digest in the beginning, because you have certain biases when it comes to finance and money, and this just turns it on its head. Okay, so this is a question, Burhan. This is not a statement. Is it a currency? Okay, the answer is maybe. Right? I personally cannot say yes or no because it depends on, again, your bias, what your definition of a currency is, probably even where you live in the world. So a currency provides two functions, right? It's a unit of account, so it helps ledgering, like balancing whether I owe you or you owe me in an economy. And it's a payment network, right? It's probably more physical than Bitcoin, but it's a payment network. So it provides those two functions. Now, so is it a currency? A currency is used to buy goods and services. Well, right now, Bitcoin, you can buy 2.5 million products with Bitcoin. There's a search engine. It will point you to anywhere on the internet for the product that you're looking for. And 6,000 physical locations where you go into a store and instead of paying with the traditional system, you pull out your phone and do the mechanism. We'll describe that mechanism later to purchase. Now, so a currency can be transmitted digitally. Modern currencies are, or the bulk of currencies can be transmitted digitally. Well, that's where Bitcoin was born, right? So this is the biggest differentiator so far. A currency is issued by a government. All modern currencies that we know today are issued by governments. With Bitcoin, of course, this is probably the biggest problem that people perceive, who are critical, perceive this to be an issue with Bitcoin. Okay, now we finished the first question with a gray area. We don't know if it's a currency or not. Let's see if it's like gold, okay? So what are the properties of gold? It's a good store of wealth. In fact, it's probably the best store of wealth we know as human beings, right? The only thing that compares to it is probably real estate. we have the saying بالكويت, right? العقار يمرض ما يموت. They're referring to the value of it. So gold is a global standard. If you go to the furthest island on earth, probably people will accept whatever gold you have. So with Bitcoin, it's an internet standard. Even in the internet, like it's only a small portion of the internet that acknowledges Bitcoin. Gold is finite. That's part of the reason it keeps its value. Bitcoin is digitally finite. Now, this is the key technical invention that made Bitcoin possible. With anything digital, we're used to, if you have a digital product, let's say you took a photo, that's a digital product, it's digital property. The problem is, because it's digital, people can copy it, right? That's why we have copyright laws. That's why we have copyright logos. Now, the key invention with Bitcoin is they created digital currency that cannot be copied. Now, this is an area of computer science called cryptography. It's very big, and we're not going to talk about that now. The last part of gold, it's obtained through mining. We know that since we were kids, we know that people dig the ground to get gold. With Bitcoin, it's called mining, and the properties are the same. So you go out looking for Bitcoins until you find them. However, that process is not physical. You don't get your hands dirty. It's a computer that does calculations. Okay, so it's, if you remember high school mathematics, there's no equation that gives you the prime number. You look at the number 1. You say, is this a prime number or not? Is it divisible by 1? Yes. So it's a prime number. You look at 2. 2 is divisible by 1 and 2, right? It's a prime number. So you test each number. There's no equation that gives you all of the numbers. So that's what your computers are doing in Bitcoin. They go through a series of numbers, trying to find a number that satisfies the algorithm that recognizes that yes, you found the solution to the problem. Here you go, you get Bitcoins. Again, this is a very interesting part, but we don't have time to talk about that now. Now, okay, so we've talked about contrasting Bitcoin with currency, and we've contrasted Bitcoin with gold. Now, let's see if it's a payment network. Okay, so it's a thing that does a thing. It's not a thing that's a thing of itself, if that makes any sense. So a payment network, think of, just like Burhan said earlier, Visa and KNet. So with Visa and KNet, their primary function is to transfer money from customers to merchants, right? That's why you use Visa or KNet. With Bitcoin, a merchant or an individual or a company, it doesn't make a difference. They're just addresses on something called what we call the blockchain. So it transfers money from anyone to anyone. Right? Contrast that with what we have now. If you're transferring money from one bank account to another bank account, you don't even use Visa or KNet. You use SWIFT or SEPA if you're in the European Union, or something else if you're in the States. So payment networks are diverse, to put it mildly. With Bitcoin, it doesn't matter. If you're a merchant and I'm paying you, I use the Bitcoin network. If you're my brother and I'm transferring money to you, I'm going to use the same mechanism. So with payment networks, a big problem and benefit, depends on where you are in the transaction, is payments are reversible. If I'm a merchant, I don't like it that payments are reversible, right? If Majid pays me, then he has a dispute, I disagree, he can go to Visa and they'll give him back his money. With Bitcoin, because Bitcoin does not recognize Majid or Abdullah, they don't recognize individuals or companies, it doesn't even recognize the law of the land, okay? Payments are irreversible because it's software that does them, and there's no perceivable way that they can be reversed. I'm not going to say impossible. I'm being careful. There's no perceivable way that it can be reversed.
It's like cash.
Yeah, so that's one aspect of cash. So probably a better slide to describe this would be a Venn diagram where you would have Bitcoin and then where it intersects with payment networks, where it intersects with banks, where it intersects with gold, right? Because it has properties of each. Okay? So I talked about similarities with existing things that we know. When the internet was new, it was facing the same problem. I mean, in hindsight, it's all clear, especially to the type of people that are in this room right now, right? The internet is very clear. When I tell you, is the internet a magazine? You're gonna tell me no, but it substitutes the function of a magazine. A magazine took the time I used for entertainment, right? Right now, probably Instagram is the best replacer or competitor to that time, but it's not a magazine, right? It takes up the same functionality, but it's a completely different paradigm. So, same thing with news and other things, pieces of our lives that the internet replaced. So you cannot say the internet is a fax machine because it has email, right? Email is something different. It's not a fax machine. So this is just to give you a perspective of where we are in the Bitcoin world. This was in 1995. So Bill Gates was interviewed by David Letterman, and David Letterman wanted to crack some jokes, but this conversation captured why it was hard to explain the internet at that time. So Letterman says, I've heard you can hear a baseball game on the internet. Does radio ring a bell? And he gets laughter and applause from the audience because it's funny, right? Yeah, why make this complicated when you can hear it over a radio? So Bill Gates is not the most articulate person, but he gets it. The intuition is there. So he says, there's a difference. It's not a huge difference. It's a very subtle difference. You can listen to the game whenever you want, what we call right now on demand. To us, it's obvious, right? Why you don't watch the TV, why you watch something on YouTube. Because everything is there when you need it. So Letterman then comes back because he's pretty good, right? So he says, do tape recorders ring a bell? He gets another laughter, and Bill Gates looks bad. But in the long term, right now, I think it's Bill Gates that looks better. Do you agree? Okay, so just like what Bill Gates said earlier, he said there's a difference. There's a small difference. It's subtle. It might go over the masses' heads. Okay, but if you pay attention to it, therein lies the key to why people are excited about Bitcoin today. So the difference is something we call decentralization. Have any of you saw the movie V for Vendetta? It's one of my favorite movies. It has some really strong ideology. And again, I'm going into politics and law, but you have to understand, because the person who invented Bitcoin had extremely libertarian views, and that was the motivation behind introducing Bitcoin. So V for Vendetta, the main idea was that instead of depowering the government was too powerful, right? Instead of depowering the government or replacing a government with somebody else who's powerful, you empower everybody. Everybody stands up together, and I know it's altruistic, but there's some strong ideology there. So everybody gets power. That way, power is decentralized, and you get a more fair system, because what you want is fairness in the end. With Bitcoin, it's the same thing. So like Burhan said, you trust the currency, okay? Or you trust the bank to interact with that bank. With Bitcoin, people or the developers who develop this cannot put one person and say, okay, trust this person, he'll issue the currency, and because the next wave of people will say, okay, what if this person turns corrupt? It's one person, they're corruptible, everybody's corruptible. So the key invention was a piece of software called the blockchain that enables you to transact, to do a secure transaction without trusting a single person. That is done by having, right now, hundreds of thousands of computers all across the world. All of them have the complete ledger. And the ledger is like, just like Burhan said, it's in a bank you have a ledger. It says you have 1,000 KD, you have 2,000 KD, you have 3,000 KD. Whenever you go to a merchant to pay, the bank says, yes, he has money, give him the product, or no, he doesn't have the money, give him the product. Or you can move the balances around, or you can withdraw or deposit into that ledger. So their centerpiece is that piece of technology. So before we talk about the ledger, so more about decentralization. So as a result of this, all transactions are recorded. Every single transaction since Bitcoin started is recorded. So when we give you Bitcoins today, if you're savvy enough, you can go to something called the Blockchain Explorer. You could follow each transaction of where those Bitcoins came from, all the way to when they were first mined. Now, they could have been mined yesterday. They could have been mined by the founder of Bitcoin. So you could actually trace that. All transactions are public, as we mentioned earlier. Personal identity is irrelevant. That's why transferring, there is no merchant and person and a company or a bank or an institution or a government. It's an algorithm that has balances. It does not differentiate between, there's no super user in the system, right? Everybody is the same. That's why identity is irrelevant. So on the blockchain, all transactions and all balances are public and anonymous. I know they sound like an oxymoron. They're public. You can see every balance in every account. You can see every transaction. However, you have no idea those accounts belong to who. Okay, so more about this ledger. So the ledger is public. It's distributed amongst all the nodes, and it records all valid transactions. Just like Burhan mentioned earlier, people will try to double spend. I maybe try to give you Bitcoins. Because it's digital, I still have that copyright. When I give it to you, I don't lose that information or that piece of code. So I can try to give it to somebody else. Now, the key invention, the algorithm that was created, prevents this without a central authority. Again, this is hugely interesting to computer scientists. We won't talk about that today. Okay, so who operates those machines? What incentive do they have to operate those machines? We lightly talked about that earlier. So it's something we call miners. So a miner could be a person, or a miner could be a company running a big operation. So what are they actually doing when they mine? When they mine, so if Majid is transferring money to myself, it's not magic. It needs to hit some computer somewhere in the world, right? It's not that's why I don't like the term cloud, because it's very misleading. It's not vaporware. There is a server that processes something. So it hits any one of the miners, right? And the miners have the incentive to validate that transaction, to look at the ledger and say, yes, he has enough balances to transfer them over to me. And then they do the cryptography required to transfer that balance in what we call atomic way. So where he can't spend it at the same time to somebody else, thereby faking money. So that's the job of the nodes. As a byproduct of that algorithm, they get 25 Bitcoins every 10 minutes. So if you're the fastest computer on the network, there's a higher probability that you'll get the 25 Bitcoins. So it works something like this. Let's say you four are miners. You're the only miners in the world, okay? You're verifying transactions, and so are all of you. Now, if you have one CPU, let's say your CPUs are all identical. If you have one CPU, there's the probability that you'll win that race every 10 minutes to secure the transaction is 25%, right? Because there are four of you and you have equal processing power. So every 10 minutes there's a race. There's a 25 probability that each one of the people sitting at the front will get those 25 Bitcoins. Now, if suddenly one of the people one of the miners buys another computer, suddenly he has twice the computing power of all four. That means he'll get double the probability that he had before. So he's taking away from their probability. The total amount of bitcoins generated in all of the network is the same. It's 25. It's just that he gets it more often, twice more often than any other members in the network. Does that make sense? Yes.
What are they achieving by solving these problems?
So what they achieve for themselves, or for what function do they provide for the network?
As in, like, for instance, as you was mentioning, if you raise a cow and you sell it, then someone has a use for that cow, and you'll say, I'll give you 20 KD. But if you solve this problem, what have you created?
Okay, so you're talking about the incentive for the miner. Okay, that's a very good question, because
The incentive for the guy giving the bitcoins, what's he getting out of this formula?
okay, so I'll go to your question first. So you said the guy giving the Bitcoin.
Yeah.
That's why, again, to the first saying, the first 6 times you think you understand Bitcoin, you don't, because you're thinking normally, like a normal human being, right? Unlike some of us, right? So maybe that's why it was easier for us to digest. But so it's not somebody that issues the Bitcoin, okay? Because if somebody issues the Bitcoin, again, I'm gonna like abuse Burhan's introduction, right? We can't tell you don't trust the government, but trust this guy instead, okay? You're trusting an algorithm, okay? Now, that algorithm can be manipulated by one person, but the rest of the network will look at how that person is behaving and will reject it. So as a result of that herd behavior, the network will, all of them will agree to issue you 25 Bitcoins if you prove that you solved this cryptographic problem. So it's the network that gives you the Bitcoins, it's not one person. So every 10 minutes, somewhere a computer wins the race, and all of the computers that look at that computer and say, validate the answer, because it's easy to check if it's right or not, and they say, okay, he did solve the answer. In my copy of the ledger, so each one has a copy, in my copy, I'll give you 25 Bitcoins. And same rule, all of them update their ledgers saying that he has 25 Bitcoins.
I think the question he's asking is, why is a person trying to crack this code? Not as on a personal incentive level, but why are you bothering to crack any code? What is the end purpose for it? And I think the answer to that would be that you're validating the network. That's the final product that you're providing as a miner.
You
Yes.
verify the transactions that are happening in the network.
Yeah.
A bulk of transactions are combined together, and then they're verified as a bulk. So when they are verified, you get rewarded for the verification with Bitcoins.
I don't want to bog it down. Maybe
No, it's, I mean, we usually get much more questions than this. I mean, this is a very open-minded crowd.
So it's more in terms of what is the intrinsic value of this whatever it's called problem. Because for instance, if I have steel, you can use the steel, but what can someone use with this problem? What's the use of it?
Okay, that's a good question. So
The use of the Bitcoin that you're validating here. It's like, it's your, every time, every 10 minutes, the entire trust of the network is revalidated. And that's the value you get. Because everyone is essentially in the same boat. They're all intrinsically trusting each other, right? And the trust is based on a mathematical formula. So the more verification of this mathematical formula can be done, the more reliance you have that the trust remains. In the real world, you don't worry about that because you are
Giving the trust to someone else.
you are taking away that reliance of trust to another authority. But here there is no authority. Imagine all of us are sitting on a boat, okay? And no one can see if the boat is sinking,
Yeah.
okay? But there is a way that every 5 minutes someone can make sure that the boat is sinking or not, right? And if whoever makes sure, they get a reward. So everyone's like, okay, the boat is not sinking. It's the same kind of concept. So there's no, it's not like they're trying to crack an algorithm to discover artificial intelligence. It's a intrinsic formula that self-sustains the network. So if all miners were to shut down, no transactions could be verified. And if no transactions could be verified, no one can use BitCurrency and the whole thing will fall flat. So it's self-sustaining. The network has to verify the transactions in order to make sure the algorithms are working fine, in order to make sure that no one has broken in and is hacking the cryptography.
yeah, so you mentioned the keyword about intrinsic value. We had maybe an hour or two discussion between us what the intrinsic value of gold is, right? That's a philosophical, economical question, societal question. I mean, there are different answers to that, but probably a more tangible answer would be the miners are replacing the central authority. In our personal lives, that would be a bank, right? Because all transactions bounce off some sort of bank, right? It's much more complicated than that, but there is a central authority where you go to. So the function that they're providing the network is replacing that centrality. Okay. So the Bitcoin protocol, as we mentioned earlier, rewards the nodes with Bitcoin. So if one of our 4 miners solves that problem before any of the other 3, the other 3 will have to award him 25 Bitcoins. And they do that by manipulating their ledgers and adding 25 Bitcoins to his address. So another thing, again, the introduction was so good. Majid talked about this in the beginning when he asked Burhan about it being deflationary. Now, the reason why it's deflationary is because of this. So the amount of reward depends on the computing power provided through a proof of work algorithm. So this is the algorithm we talked about. Now, this algorithm cuts the reward in half every, I think it's 4 years. 4 years, Saad?
Yeah. Yes.
4 years, yeah.
It's almost 40.
Yeah.
Exact. Depends on the number.
Yeah, on the hashing power. So when Bitcoin started, it used to reward miners with 50 Bitcoins, whoever wins, 50 Bitcoins every 10 minutes. So it's very clear, very predictable. Every 4 years, that cuts in half. Again, that's built into the algorithm. So by default, if the economy stays the same, the price of Bitcoin should rise according, but there are much more forces in that, and it might actually crash again. So don't take that as investment advice, but that's how the algorithm is built. I keep touching the economics and getting electrocuted and jumping back off again. Okay, now this is a very amusing part of Bitcoin. Okay, so when it first started, it was a nice community. Everybody would download the software and become a miner, right? That's what we were promised. Download software, mine it, and you'll get an equal chance as everybody else. Those were the good old days. Now, because there's an economic incentive, people have turned their homes into computer data centers, right? These are homes, right? This guy did not even wait enough to put a proper rig because literally time is money over there, right? When he got them, he needed to run them as fast as possible because the longer they're running, the more Bitcoins he'll get. So people did not have time to build out proper mining rigs. So the Bitcoin nuclear arms race started. Now, as a result, chip manufacturers actually developed what are called ASICs, if you're in this field, application-specific processors. So these are, instead of like a CPU that can do many things in a computer, this chip can only do one thing. It can only do the mathematical calculation that is required for Bitcoin.
Before ASICs, there were FPGAs,
Yes, you're right.
which
Yeah.
basically did everything, weren't as good as ASICs, and then ASICs came out.
Yes, and ASICs were. In fact, that slide was there. We removed it to condense it, but that's good, yeah. So there were FPGAs, and after FPGAs, there are ASICs. And because this was industrialized, the result now looks like this. These are entire warehouses where people, if you don't think Bitcoin is serious, somebody somewhere on earth believes Bitcoin is serious enough to do this, right? And let me just give you a moment to appreciate what's happening here. These do not have business licenses. We do not know most of where these pictures are taken from because they don't need a payment gateway, they don't need a merchant account at a bank, they don't need a business license. They need a warehouse, they need electricity and the internet, and they don't even really need fast internet. Okay, so Because of this, we don't really have a clear picture of what the size is of miners around the world is. But because of these are competing with your tiny processor in your laptop. So, yeah.
Sorry, so around the world, every 10 minutes, just one unit of all of these units worldwide receives 25 bitcoins.
Yes. Yeah, I know what you're saying. So we gave enough talks about this to know what to like ignore, what to lie about, and what. So because somebody caught me, I'll explain it a little more. So because the way I explained it, the conclusion you did is exactly right. So the way you're thinking is very logical. So one of them wins, right? But because of the sheer number of participants in the network, one of these will likely need to wait 200 years for the probability to win. Okay. As a result, something was invented which was called mining pools, right?
Sorry,
Mining pools. So it's just like carpooling, right? You four were the only people in the network. You were very happy, right? You were the kings of Bitcoin. But suddenly all of these